So let's get started with the simple installation of Sysmon. So to install Sysmon, we typically use the -I switch for installation, and we can accept the license either via pop-up, or we can do -accept EULA to accept the end user license agreement, just like any other Microsoft product. So let's get started. We can do Sysmon exe -I accept EULA. And what is going to happen is, since I ran the sysmon.exe on a 64-bit system, it is going to decompress a copy of itself inside of C Windows, and it's going to then create two services. One service is going to be for Sysmon, the service itself that processes all of the filters that we configure in Sysmon, and the other one is going to be a type 1 service. Now, a type 1 service is one that actually loads the driver into the kernel, and also the filter driver that attaches to the different volumes inside of the machine. So it's going to attach to those so you can get the file hashes. It's going to also get information about the executables themselves, like the version number, the publisher, description, and other metadata that can be found on each individual image for the different files that we can collect events on. So what happens if we want to uninstall Sysmon? The way that we would uninstall Sysmon is by using the -u parameter for uninstall. In fact, if we want to look at all of the different parameters that we have available to us, we can get an initial subset just by going and looking in the Sysmon help by doing $?. And we have only a subset of different parameters that we can use. And we can see that for uninstallation, we just pass -u and then as an optional parameter, we can just use the word force to force an uninstall and removal of the files in case they're locked or being still used by another process. So let's do an uninstall. So one of the things it's going to do is going to stop the Sysmon process. Once stopped, it's going to remove the Sysmon process from the drive itself, from this system itself, that service. It's going to unload the Sysmon driver that is attached to the different volumes. And then it is going to stop the service that loads that Sysmon driver. And then it's going to remove that. And last, it's going to remove all of the files. Then we can just install a newer version. Or if we need to go back to an older version that we have archived for any reason, we can then do that at this moment. Now, typically attackers, when they land in the system, one of the things that they're going to do is that they're going to do situational awareness. By situational awareness, I want to say that is that when we land on that system, we want to know what are the processes that are running in that system, what are the drivers, the different products that may impede or in some way cause a detection of our actions and cost us our access to the system itself. Now, attackers, pen tester, red teamers, what they're going to do is that they're going to try to minimize as much as possible their detection surface, if you want to call it, which means that the least amount of APIs or code that will not raise suspicion on the system. So typically one of the things that we're going to do is we're going to list files, we're going to list processes. Sometimes we may read from the registry, and we may list services. So we can gain that initial situational awareness on the system to know what are those controls that are going to be there, that are going to affect what tools can we use, and our operational tempo. How fast can we move once we land in that system? In the case of Sysmon, we can actually hide the Sysmon utility itself on the system. We can do two things. We can change the driver name, or we can just change the service name and executable name that runs. Typically those parameters, you don't see them in the initial help when you look at that subset. If we want to look at those extended parameters that Sysmon offers, we look at the schema. The way to look at the schema is we do Sysmon -s. I'm going to pipe it, in this case, into more so we can go through and page through all of the data, since it's going to be a lot. And here we can see that we have command line options. We have them named here. This is the switch. We have a name or description. We have if the argument is optional or not. And then we have configuration parameters are specific around configuring Sysmon itself. And here we have one where we can change the driver name. Now, this has to be 8 characters or less. So let's do something. I already, in this folder, I renamed Sysmon, and I named it HPPRNT-SRV. So we're going to hide it as if it is an Hewlett-Packard printer service. We need to rename this because this Sysmon will use its name as the value for the service registry key creation, and also is going to be referenced and used when we need to update. So we have to use an executable with the same name because it's going to use that value to reference the name of the service when it wants to modify that configuration. So in this case, I just need to do HP PRNT service -I for installation. I'm going to do -D for the driver name. Remember, 8 characters or less. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So we have enough characters there. And I'm going to do accept EULA indicates that this is the first initial install. If you already installed Sysmon before in the system, this parameter is not mandatory since it's going to already be stored in the registry. Here we can see that the service was installed and started, and it's called HPPRNT-SRV. We see that the service that is specific for the driver was already created and started. And if we want to look at the drivers are installed in the system, since we're still running as administrator, I can just go Windows, System 32, and then I can run fl tmc.x is going to list all of those filter drivers are currently installed in the system. And if I look at this, I'm going to notice that my driver is installed and is attached in multiple places in the volume. And I can see the altitude number. Now, the altitude number is not going to change. The main reason that the altitude number is not going to change because it is assigned by Microsoft and it sets in order that that driver actually gets loaded into the system. We don't want collisions. That's why Microsoft assigns this. If we have collisions, 2 things can happen. Either the product is disabled or we're going to cause a blue screen on the system, which we don't want. Now, an attacker can actually use this same technique to enumerate drivers and even unload the driver blinding Sysmon. In this case, I'm already running as administrator, so I already am able to do actions against the system with higher privileges, but if they can actually enumerate it by the altitude number. But this requires them to actually have a payload that is going to load the filter driver management DLL. If they load that, then they need to still be admin, so they need to have higher privileges, which means they can be detected by loading that kind of library. Or they can just go through the entire registry for the services that are installed in the system, enumerate it that way, and that's still a lot of work. Now, typically attackers want the biggest bang for their buck. So one of the things they're going to do is they're going to list the drivers, they're going to list the processes, they're going to list the services and go from there. If they need to write specific rules for each individual EDR monitoring software, that is going to be a gigantic effort. So this works very well for that initial stage of access of an attacker if they don't go deeper into their situational awareness process, which many don't. So we just took a look at some of the ways that you can actually install Sysmon. and how you can hide Sysmon from attackers in your system. So I really hope that you guys find this information useful and it's something that you can apply. You remember the rules. The driver needs to be 8 characters or less, the driver name. And if you do it this way and you want to run again the Sysmon executable to update, install, or do an uninstallation, you need to rename that version of Sysmon that you're going to be using for those actions with the same name that you actually renamed the original one that you used for the installation. So thank you for your time. I really hope that you enjoyed the video.